As Singapore seeks to establish itself as a bastion of inclusivity, diversity and openness, the recent announcement that the controversial fast food chain Chick-fil-A is opening its doors raises pertinent questions about the limits of inclusivity. With a well-documented history of donations to anti-LGBTQ plus organizations and discriminatory practices, Chick-fil-A's arrival in Singapore seems to run contrary to the country's efforts to embrace diversity, particularly following the repeal of Section 377A, which decriminalized same-sex relationships. The dilemma that Singapore now faces is this: should an inclusive society welcome all entities, even those with a track record of exclusion? This debate taps into broader questions about whether inclusivity should also include entities or individuals whose practices directly contradict Singapore's stated goals of diversity. Chick-fil-A has faced considerable backlash in the United States for its financial support of groups known for opposing LGBTQ+ rights. For years, the company made donations to organizations such as the Family Research Council and Exodus International, groups that have been vocal in their opposition to same-sex marriage and have promoted conversion therapy. Though Chick-fil-A claims to have since shifted its focus, it has not entirely shed its reputation as a company that at one point openly opposed the rights of the LGBTQ+ community. For many Singaporeans, Chick-fil-A's values seem antithetical to the country's modern identity. Singapore has long promoted itself as a multicultural, pluralistic society where people of various backgrounds, cultures and identities coexist. In this context, the arrival of a company with such a controversial legacy raises the question, is there a point at which inclusivity should draw the line? From an economic perspective, proponents of Chick-fil-A's entry into Singapore might argue that inclusivity extends to all businesses, regardless of their past practices. Singapore is known for its pro-business environment, welcoming international companies as a way to boost economic growth and provide more choices to consumers. By allowing a diverse array of businesses to operate, Singapore could claim it is truly inclusive not just socially but economically as well. In this view, inclusivity would mean allowing even controversial entities like Chick-fil-A to compete in the marketplace. Customers who disagree with Chick-fil-A's past practices can simply choose not to patronize the chain. The free market, they argue, should dictate success. By this logic, barring Chick-fil-A would itself be exclusionary, creating a paradox in which inclusivity is used as a rationale for exclusion. However, opponents of Chick-fil-A's presence in Singapore argue that inclusivity should not extend to organizations with a documented history of exclusion and discrimination. Singapore's recent strides toward inclusivity, particularly in regard to LGBTQ+ rights, show the nation moving toward a more open, accepting society. Allowing a company like Chick-fil-A to enter the market could be seen as a step backward, especially when considering the social implications. This argument posits that inclusivity must be coupled with ethical responsibility. Inclusivity should not mean giving a platform to those who promote exclusionary practices, as doing so implicitly endorses these practices. By welcoming Chick-fil-A, Singapore could be sending a message that economic interests outweigh the protection of marginalized communities. Inclusivity in this context should mean building a society where all people, regardless of their gender, race, religion, or sexual orientation, are accepted and celebrated. Singapore has already demonstrated a willingness to draw the line when it comes to harmful or exclusionary ideologies. Singapore's commitment to inclusivity includes rejecting those who promote division. If Singapore has been willing to deny access to religious leaders with divisive messages, then welcoming a company like Chick-fil-A into the country raises important questions. Can a society that promotes inclusivity allow entities that have a history of exclusion? Does the economic benefit of hosting an international fast food chain outweigh the social and moral implications of supporting a company with such a controversial past? One way to strike a balance between free market principles and social responsibility could be to demand accountability from companies like Chick-fil-A. If Singapore chooses to welcome the brand, it could do so with conditions, such as requiring the company to adopt and publicly demonstrate non-discriminatory hiring practices, support local causes that benefit marginalized communities, or promote inclusivity within its operations. In this way, Singapore can ensure that businesses operating within its borders align with its values of diversity and inclusion.